Hush is a 2016 horror movie directed by Mike Flanagan. It's also written by Mike Flanagan and his wife, Kate Siegel. It also stars Kate Siegel in the film. And this is our series where we do a deep dive on directors, actors, franchises, and we are continuing in this season to talk about director Mike Flanagan. We've already talked about his first three movies, which included his first few theatrical releases, and now this is his first film that has hit Netflix with Hush. Alex, what's your background with Hush?
I remember it being quite a big deal when it came out. Like, oh man, this movie, man, this is great. They just, I think back then, like good movies being dumped on Netflix was still like a thing. Before, I don't think it's much of a thing now. I think now it's like, oh god, Netflix. But I think Netflix still had some popularity back then, and I remember it being very popular. And looking back at it, it kind of reminds me like it would be a good COVID movie, like a couple of these where it's like this could have been made during COVID.
I also saw it when it first came out on Netflix,
Mm-hmm.
and this was my first time watching it since then, since 2016. And it is crazy to think, even though 2016 feels recent, it really wasn't. And I think Netflix's first original film, which I believe was Beasts of No Nation with Idris Elba, I think that was 2016. Like, they had not been making movies very long. Hush actually is not a movie made by Netflix. They just purchased the rights to distribute it.
Mm-hmm.
And so those rights actually just ran up about a month ago, which is why we couldn't find this film anywhere.
Nowhere, literally. I even downloaded Tubi to try to find this movie, but luckily someone uploaded the whole thing on YouTube. So
Yeah, we're able to upload it on YouTube. There's no like official way, even to rent it or buy it. There's nowhere to get the movie, which I guess is a downside of a streaming service that no longer carries your film. But the director, Mike Flanagan, did say on Twitter that he is, now that he owns the rights again, he is pursuing a physical release eventually.
Oh, sweet, yeah.
So looking forward to that. Definitely a movie I will buy because I do enjoy it.
I didn't as much. No, on a rewatch, I'm like, oh god, it was very annoying in some places, very underutilized in some. I felt like the main character's deaf, right, and she's mute, and I feel like very little in the movie that is utilized in a neat sense. There are some familiar faces, though. I mean, it stars Kate Siegel, which we know is Mike Flanagan's wife and constant star in many of his projects.
And this was the beginning. She was in Oculus, but this is like the first time. Oh, and a small role in Ouija too, also.
Yeah, yeah.
But this was her first time as the star.
And they're actually co-writers on this. And they came up with the idea on a date in 2014. Like, this whole idea was just like, they came up with it on a date. It's like, it's a what-if scenario, kind of like Tusk, just not as bad as Tusk.
I was going to say, I hope you like it more than Tusk at least.
Also, another Flanagan regular, Samantha Sloyan, who was in Midnight Mass as the annoying religious lady. And John Gallagher Jr. from 10 Cloverfield Lane. He's in this.
I did not remember Samantha Sloyan from Midnight Mass being in this. She actually also is in Haunting of Hill House, and I don't remember who she is because when I was looking at the IMDb's to get ready for this, it says 8 episodes Haunting Hill House for her.
What?
And so I don't remember the character name, but I'm looking forward to seeing if I can pick her out when we watch the show. That must be a pretty sizable role to be in 8 episodes, so I don't know how I'm forgetting.
For us not to know, yeah.
Yeah. But when she popped up in this, I was immediately, Leo meme, yeah. I was immediately like, oh my God. I do agree that, what's our number one thing most of the time? Pacing. It's a very, very short movie. I think only 80 minutes. So for your 80-minute movie to feel slow at times is like kind of a stretch, right?
Yeah.
And I do feel like they were really stretching out this premise. But I bought into how original it was, and for the most part, how they were able to keep it like fresh with the idea. Like, to me, the idea didn't become boring. There were other aspects of the movie I found boring that we'll get into, but the whole idea of the main character of Maddie being deaf and mute and not knowing that this killer is here at her house until she knows, and then dealing with that, I found very interesting.
Yeah, there were some neat little horror moments, but not too much, and it didn't lead to anything. Like, one moment I really liked, because she's deaf, so she often like texts like on the laptop, so she can see it pop up. And a lot of people do that. They iMessage on their laptop, and there's a cool thing where she gets a text from herself, and she's getting pictures, and it slowly leads up to the exact moment where she's sitting on the chair, and she does like a slow turn. It's like, oh God, here we go. And then like she turns the corner, and he's just standing there, like no, it's like, oh, it just fell flat. Like, it was a cool build-up just to him to stand there, and it's like, oh. And there's too many times where their perspective is from the killer's perspective. Like, you even see camera shots like from his back looking in, and it's like, there's no fear there if we're like, with him. I feel like there was no tension.
One thing I will agree with you is that I think the first act of the movie is the strongest.
Yeah.
Like the hook of what's going on when the killer first shows up, all of that is very fun, and I was very into it both on my first time watching, my vague memories of it, and the rewatching. I will agree that as it goes on is where it starts to deviate from what I found to be very interesting. I did also want to bring up, we can't forget to mention, the character of Maddie is an author in this movie, and she wrote Midnight Mass.
Yeah.
The book is called Midnight Mass. As a matter of fact, she has her friend read it, Samantha Sloan's character, and she even brings up the characters of Riley and Aaron,
Yeah,
who are the main characters.
Yeah, it blew my mind, especially since the one saying it is a character in Midnight Mass.
I loved Riley. I loved Aaron. They were great.
Yeah, that is nuts, and it's obviously a story he's wanted to make for a really long time, and it's cool that it showed up in this. Not the only time it shows up, but this I think was the first time, and it'd be such a. I mean, it's not a huge part of the movie, but it's the motivation of her character. She's a writer, and she has now kind of made it, with Midnight Mass. I found that very interesting.
Like the first act of this movie, like such neat little setups. Like she's FaceTiming with her sister, and like they could have used that more. Where it's like they tease it for a second, like, oh, what's that behind you? And it's like after that, it's like all the cool, neat little stuff goes away and just becomes more about her. She's talking about the ending of her books, right? Oh, it always have 7 different endings, and no spoilers yet, but it all plays into how the final act works. But
I would recommend this movie, but you can only watch it on YouTube as of right now. Once it releases physically, I'm sure it'll be available to rent eventually, and I would recommend that, or it'll end up on one of these, free services with ads or whatever.
Yeah.
But I would recommend checking it out just because it's so quick. It's 80 minutes, and it is an original idea. So even if you have problems with it or, stuff like that, I still feel like it's not just the same garbage you're going to see in a lot of thrillers. It introduces something new. And before we even got into this series or anything like that, Hush had stuck out to me without even knowing it was Mike Flanagan from when I very first saw it. Like even to this day being like, oh, well, I haven't seen a thriller like that. Like it truly is one of a kind in that respect. It might not be your thing, but it is one of a kind. So I would recommend it just based on that.
because it's Flanagan, I would recommend this. There is some good stuff in here.
Would you say it's your least favorite thus far, or do you like it better than some of the other ones we've seen?
I think I like it better than Ouija, because Ouija just felt like a hired hand type deal, even though it was a lot of Flanagan. But I just felt
Like he literally was hired hand. Yeah.
yeah, you know how people aren't the best in the early days, and then they find their stride. I mean, we know when they hit their stride, but it feels like they're still in the early. They're still figuring everything out here.
All right, we're going to spoil the movie now. The killer ends up just being nobody. I mean, it's just a guy that just wants to kill people. And that was one of my biggest problems with it is if you're going to make him a character, then make him some type of character. Why show his face and make him talk and have the dialogue scenes with him to then still just make him a random dude?
It worked in Halloween because he never spoke. You know what I mean? It was the first one to really do it. But with this, it's just like, he just came off like an incel, especially when he was like talking to like the other dude. Oh, I never would have want to fight with you. Oh, you're a linebacker. It's like it's just like a jealous ex-boyfriend. I want to bring up they tease like this Craig character. He gets like a text message from she gets like a text message from Craig. I thought about you today. It's like okay, but we see in his FaceTime profile picture that he's black. And then when we first see the killer, we can see his skin complexion behind the mask and on his neck that he's white. So like there's no tension there that you think it's going to be this Craig character because they obviously set that up like, oh, it's going to be this crazy ex-boyfriend or this new dude, but no, it's just some dude. And killer with no motivation that's not interesting or cool like Michael Myers, it just didn't work. I don't know.
Yeah, and that was my least favorite part of the movie is that scene with the neighbor character, Michael Trucco, who is later on in more of Mike Flanagan's stuff as well, as everyone is, right?
Very frustrating scene, especially at the end when she's like banging and then like...
That was like the classic horror movie, damn it, yeah, where he's literally about to hit him over the head with the rock, and then she bangs on the door and it gets him killed. Frustrating in that manner, but a classic horror trope. But the whole scene, I felt just watching it like, I don't care about this character. He's obviously going to be killed, and we're just wasting time in an 80-minute movie. You know, I was so interested and bought into Maddie's character and the whole deaf and mute scenario that I just didn't care to see these two regular people talking. And it goes on for quite a while. So to have such a wasted amount of time in an 80-minute movie is, yeah, I would agree that was the weakest part.
How about the fake out? We see her running, and then we see the killer catch her and like smash her head with a rock. I'm like scenes like that where it's not real, it almost takes me out of it a little bit. Just a little bit. It's like, it's like, oh yeah, it's a movie. You know, it's like, sure, she was fantasizing that, but it's like seeing it happen and like knowing it's like pulls me out a little bit.
Because it doesn't really fit into this. Like the whole movie thus far is so grounded and like gritty and has a realistic tone. For then there to be a fantasy sequence was pretty jarring.
I was like so bored at some points where I literally wanted to get like a gotcha moment where it's like, okay, she has this meningitis. So I literally Googled like blah, blah, blah symptoms. And I paused, like in the back of her book, I paused, like a freeze frame. She's like, I'm like, I bet you, you know, that's not a symptom of this disease. But it said like in a surgery, it was botched, her hearing and, you know, voice. I'm like, damn it.
Oh,
Mike.
wow. So it actually medically checked out.
Yeah, I'm like, damn it. You know, I was so like, ugh, with the movie. I'm like, I want to get something.
When I did a little bit of listening, some interviews and stuff, and a little behind the scenes, it really does feel like they, like you said, just thought of this idea. And I heard that they actually made most of the script just based on them two in their house, just like walking around the house and thinking of what to do in the movie.
Yeah.
So then when they actually went to go make the movie, the house they filmed at was so different from their own home, they actually had to rewrite a lot of the script. So it doesn't seem like this movie, I don't want to say lack of effort, but I feel like this movie was just like, hey, we have this cool idea, let's just do it.
Let's
You know
make
what
a
I mean?
movie.
Yeah, let's just do it. And I got some money from Jason Blum. Let's just go do it, you
Yeah.
know? And he did also say, with the original idea, he wanted to make a movie that had no dialogue at all. That was the original plan. But then he ultimately decided against it because he said that he didn't think he would be able to build enough tension without any dialogue. And honestly, I don't think the addition of any of the dialogue in this added tension. Like, there were definitely sequences I really liked, like when he does kill the neighbor character, and while they're right there on the door, and Maddie obviously doesn't hear them and is looking the other way, and he's like stabbing her. I liked that whole sequence, but I wouldn't say I felt tense during it, or the scene with the neighbor. I didn't feel tension. So I don't think the dialogue really ended up mattering. It would have been cool to have zero dialogue. That would have been interesting.
Yeah. Also, turn on the subtitles on YouTube because it's the video on YouTube says with subtitles, but you have to turn them on. There's no like, because she starts talking in sign. I watched like the first 15 minutes of this movie, and like she's just talking in sign language. I'm like, fuck, I don't know sign language. I'm like, wait a minute, the title said subtitles, so you have to turn them on. It's not like a lot of movies for like sign language, so you know they'll put them in there for you, but no, you have to turn them on. The face reveal scene, like, just took the wind out of everything. I feel like it should have been something that should have worked, because it's like, okay, she's like, oh, I never saw your face, you can just leave, we can just forget this whole thing. And by taking off the mask, it's like, okay, now one of us has to die, because I've seen you, and you've seen me, so it's like, this has to, but it just didn't work. I don't know how. I felt like that was something that could have worked, but it just didn't for me.
I really liked it in the moment, but again, it leads to, okay, then when the movie's over, it's like, but then why did it matter? You know what I mean? Because in the moment, I'm like, it did make me buy into like, oh, whoever this guy is really savage. Like, being like, oh, because you didn't see my face? Well, now you have seen my face. Like, oh, this guy is messed up. But then he just ends up, like you said, just kind of like being a dude. So
yeah, if it continued to not say anything, and then this straight face the entire time, would have been much more effective. People talk about, can you imagine how terrifying Spider-Man would be if he didn't talk? You know what I mean?
yeah, it's true, yeah.
A very nice scene I did like that kind of worked, where they actually took, you know, they used things that they should have, because he gets too cocky with the fact that she's deaf, and like he breathes on the back of her neck, and there's a cool scene where, like, you know, Matrix style, you know, he's going to stab her, and she's also going to stab him in the back, and then she gets him and runs away. I'm like, he was right there. You could have finished it. Also, Flanagan has a big thing for hand mutilation, it seems. So we'll get to this in Gerald's game. It's like, Jesus, dude, why? Would you get her hand stuck in the door?
Smashed in the door, yeah.
It's like, oh, why? Why? It's even worse than Gerald's game, but why?
One fun fact that I did think was interesting that I read about was that this movie actually did spawn 2 remakes in India.
Yeah.
They made 2 different versions, 2 different languages in India. So I guess Mike Flanagan must have sold the rights or something. But it's rare that you hear that for such a small movie. But maybe it was the Netflix success that got more word spread about it. But yeah, I just found that very interesting. This came out in April, and then Ouija, which is the last movie we talked about, it came out the following fall. So this actually did predate it. We did it in this order because this was kind of the start of his streaming career. You know, Ouija and Oculus being in theaters, and now this being the first Netflix movie, even though it's not a Netflix original. But then he had, you know, 3 movies in succession, 3 years in a row on Netflix before eventually jumping into series on Netflix. So most of the stuff we talk about moving forward is all going to be Netflix for the most part. But yeah, I mean, I think that's all I had on it.
Yeah, when did Stranger Things come out? Did this predate that?
I think it was right around the same time because I believe Stranger Things season 1 was 2016 also.
Yeah, so 2016 was a good year.
Yeah, good year for Netflix. I wish they could have another 2016, but I don't think it's going to happen.
I don't know.